So this is a longer video, and so what I've done to help you, navigate through it is I've put this table of contents with timestamps in it, so that you can navigate to the relevant part of the video to see whatever content or elements would be most useful. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to merge data in Stata. And this video is going to be a little bit different because instead of jumping right into walking you through how to use and navigate Stata, I'm going to start with a PowerPoint to kind of explain what merging is for and it's all about with some examples because this can be a little bit complex, especially for new Stata users. And then we'll see an example in actually using Stata. So a little bit about what merging data is a merge is a way to combine two different data sets. And that would be if you have two different data sets that there's some overlap and that the same units are in both data sets, but you want to take variables from one data set and add that onto another data set. So in that kind of a situation, you would want to do a merge. And to merge data using Stata, so in other words, to combine two data sets to add variables from one data set to another data set and match everything up, there are three things that you need. One is the variables that are used to match observations between data sets. And I have variables, so it can be one variable that you use to match observations between two data sets, or it can be multiple variables that you can use, just depending on the task that's at hand. So whatever you're going to use to match observations between data sets has to be the same. So the variable names have to be the same, and the values of those variables have to be the same for a merge to be able to work. The second thing is at least one of the data sets that are being merged. So again, you'll have two data sets that you want to combine. At least one of them has to be unique on the variables that are used to match observations. So again, it could be one variable that you're using to match observations, or it could be two. But at least one of the data sets has to be unique on that, meaning if you're using, say, a student ID number or something like that, one data set can have the same student ID number appear on multiple lines, but the other data set then has to be structured so that each student ID number only appears once. So one of those data sets has to be unique. The other thing is that you'll need to know the file path for the data sets that you're working with, and that's just so that you can you need to have that available so that you can use that in the code. And the other thing is that the data sets should be saved in Stata's .dta format. And there's another video where I show how to import data from other formats and save it. There is another way of doing this if you're using Stata 16, using the frames functions. I'm not going to show that here, where you can, where some of these things are not exactly or a little different. One being that you can import data into different frames and combine it that way. Another is that if you have different variables that the variables that identify that you want to use to match between data sets is different between the two data sets, then if you are using the frames features, there's a way to tell Stata which two variables are equivalent. Again, not going to show that here, but if you're a more advanced user, those are some things to look at that can make some of your work a little bit more streamlined. So anyway, so that's the basics of what a merge does and what you, the user, will need to know to be able to successfully merge data. And a brief overview of the process here is, so to start off, when you want to combine two data sets, meaning that you want to take variables from one data set and add that to the corresponding observations on another data set. So you start off by loading into Stata one of the data sets that is going to be merged. That data set that you start with is called the master data. Then you need to know the variables that are going to be used to merge the data sets. You need to determine which of the three types of merges are going to be performed. On the next slide, I'll walk through what those three types of merges are. The type of merge that's going to be performed between these two data sets that you're working with depends on what each observation represents in each data set. And so that sounds a little bit abstract, and really what it comes down to is depending on the structure of the data, you'll need to understand that to perform the right kind of merge. And then you'll take the file path for the other data set that you want to merge. That's called the using data set in merge parlance. And you're going to use that to add variables from that using data set onto the master data set. And then what you'll wind up with is a combined data set. So here are a brief overview of the three types of merges that you may want to do using Stata. So the first is called a one-to-one merge. And this is a type of merge that you use when the observations are unique on your matching variable or variables in both the master data and the using data. And so what you do with the merge command here, what Stata does once you enter the merge command is observations from the using data are matched to the corresponding observation, to their corresponding observation in the master data, and whatever new variables there are in the using data then just get added on to the master data, and everything lines up that way. So that's a one-to-one. One-to-one merges are the cleanest if you can do that generally. But it doesn't mean that others are inferior or get you worse data. The second type of merge is called a many-to-one merge. And so this is the type of merge that is used when observations in the master data are not unique on the variable or variables being used to match the master and using data sets, but observations in the using data are. And so what this means is, so you have duplicates of your matching variable or variables in your master data, but not in the using data. And so what happens in this type of merge, observations in the using data are associated with, because that's where it's unique, those observations are associated with all of the corresponding observations in the master data, and then any new variables from the using data get added onto the master data. Then there is a one-to-many merge. So this is similar conceptually to a many-to-one merge, except that the difference here is that observations in the master data are unique on the matching variable or variables, but there are duplicate observations of the matching variable or variables in the using data. One thing that's a little different is in a one-to-many merge, the resulting data that you wind up with could end up having more observations. So with a one-to-one merge, those tend to not get additional observations. That way, it's possible. If all of the observations in one data set are not in the other, you can wind up with additional observations, but you tend to wind up with additional observations from, or you're more likely to get them from one-to-many merges. So, and then here is just some conceptual examples of each of the three types of merges that we'll walk through before I show you how to do this in Stata. So here is an example of a one-to-one merge. So up on the top left here, so this is going to be our using data, and we'll see that we've got three variables, just an ID number, a name, and then we've got height. And then this is our using data, where we've got ID, we've got name, and then we've got weight. And so we want to figure out, well, which variable do we want to use to match them? So we could match, in this case, if you look, ID, we have ID and name that are common in both of these data sets. And if we look through, we could use either ID, or we could use name, or we could use both. And what it comes down to is, each data set is unique on ID. Each data set is also unique on name. In a situation like this, anytime you're working with names, my recommendation is avoid trying to match using names, because things can very easily be misentered in one version of the data. So use some like an ID number or something like that whenever it's available. But anyway, so basically what you're doing here is, so you want to match these two data sets. And essentially what this command right here does is, merge one-to-one, ID, so that's our matching variable using, and then we would put whatever the file path is to this file over here, and that gets us this data set right here. And so essentially what this command does is it tells Stata to say, okay, ID number one, or sorry, ID 1001. All right, go over here, find ID 1001. Okay, name is already in the other data set, so we don't need to bring name over. Weight, this is new. Okay, so then weight gets added down here, and then the value of 140 for ID 1001 gets added to this variable. And it does that over, and over again. In this case, there's only 4, but in theory, there could be, thousands, millions, etc. And that's this command basically tells Stata to do that process. So then here is a many-to-one merge. Now here we have one data set that is schools. So we have this variable called school ID that identifies schools. So 1001, 2, 3, and 4. And then this data also has district ID. So, 111, 112, 112, 113. This data over here, our using data, is at the district level, so 111, 112, 113. So we have one data set that is we would say at the school level, where each observation represents a school, but each school is associated with a district. Then we have our using data, which has everything is at the district level, so it has district level information. And so what we're doing here is we're going to take this variable, student-teacher ratio, which is in our using data is a district variable. And so we want to add that to this data over here, which is about schools. And so because of that, we want to use district ID is our matching variable. And so so if you look over here, if you're thinking like, well, this should be a 1-to-1 because each school because we're unique at the school level, and that's true. But we want to use the district ID variable as our matching variable. And in that case, we're not unique, right? Because we have 111, then we see 112, and then 112 again. So this is not unique on district ID. So that's why this is a many-to-one merge. And so this command right here would generate this data set that's down here at the bottom. So it took this data set, our master data set, and then added this information about student-teacher ratio. And so again, in terms of what this command does, is it asks Stata to start with, okay, so district 111, like go over here, district 111, student-teacher ratio 24.1, add that add that in a new column over here, which is what we get here in our resulting data. Then, for district 112, go find that here, 26. So it's going to put the value of 26 right here or down here. And then when you get to this next school, since it's also district 112, it's going to take this value of 26 for student-teacher ratio and then put it over here for this school as well, which is what we see down here in the resulting data. Then here is a one-to-many merge. So over here, this data is all made up. So what we have here is our master data is all at the university level. So there's a university identification number. And then I've got something here, let's say this is tuition in thousands. And then we have a using data, which is at the student level. So we have, this data set is unique on student, but it's not unique on university. So what we want to do is we want to have a combined data set, and it would be student. So each observation, in this case, would end up being a student. But we want to add more information about their university. And that's what we get down here in the resulting data. And so the way that this works, so this code right here generates this data set down here. And essentially what it does is it starts off by saying, university 1111, university 1111, since we're using university ID as our matching variable. And then C is like, oh, okay, well, we're going to add student ID number over here, and then financial aid gets added as another column, and so that's why this is down here. And then for 2,222, for that university, goes over here, finds this, then it's going to, it being Stata is going to see like, oh, there's another multiple here, or another observation with this value here, and so then the value of 12 for tuition is going to get added over here, which is what we see down here at the bottom. And then the other thing is you'll see that this isn't a perfect match. So there's a student here in the using data, student 1005 from university 4444, who is in the using data, but information about their university is not in the master data. And so when we get to the resulting data, we'll just see that it's missing. It means it's just not there. So this is a one-to-many merge, and some of you may be thinking, well, why wouldn't you just start with this data set here, start with the student level and then merge on the university characteristics? And you could certainly do that. It would just be like, if it's more convenient to do a one-to-many merge, if you already had this data set open and wanted to merge the student stuff onto it, this is how you would do it. But if you're starting from scratch, maybe conceptually it's easier as you're thinking through the data management process to start with the student level data and then merge university characteristics onto that. That might be simpler, because in this case, when you start with the university level data, so you start with university level data, this is your master data, but your resulting data is actually student level data, where each observation or line identifies a separate student. All right, so I'm going to pause for a quick second and then going to walk through what this looks like in Stata. Okay, so now I have two sessions of Stata open, as you'll see. Each one has a different data set loaded into it, so I'm doing this just for illustrative purposes. And so what we have on the left side here, so this is a data set of schools in New Jersey for the 2017-18 school year. So if we bring this up, we'll just see a large spreadsheet. This data set has information on enrollment, so we've got some, the county code, county name, in terms of the identifiers, district code, district name, school code, school name, and then information about the student enrollment in that school by grade and overall. Then on the right-hand side, this is a data set that also has many of the same identifiers, so county code, name, district code and name, school code and name, and then this has information on SAT, ACT, and PSAT participation for each school, and then over here there's a couple variables for the statewide average for each of those. And so one thing that we'll see is on the left, our data set has 2,519. So this is the information on student, or the data set that has information on student enrollment, has 2,519 observations. And so each observation should be a school. Over here on the right, our data set only has 432. So that's a lot fewer. That's not a problem. That's just something to point out. And this makes sense, because since this data set contains information on SAT, ACT, and PSAT participation, those aren't offered at elementary schools. And so you would expect there to be fewer schools in this data set. And so what we want to do to merge these two data sets, so ideally we want this all to be school level, right? So since each line in each data set represents a different school, it would be nice if our resulting data was also, each line represents one school in that year. So what that means is the identifier that we want to use is probably school code. And just to bring the data back up, So this is a similar situation as in the examples where we have school name and we have school code. In these cases, again, my recommendation is always to use the school code for that. So what we want to do is we want to check and see if make sure that are these observations, or sorry, are these data sets unique on that variable. So what we can do is there's a command we can type in, duplicates report, and then we can just put in school code, and then and the short version of what we see in both of these is where it says copies. This means that there are duplicates. Like if you see anything, we see, these tables that show copies and says, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. They're different. You can read more into this, but for our purposes, when we're trying to figure out the best way to do a merge, anything more than 0 means that you have duplicates. So that means that there are duplicates of school code. So if we look at our data, then we might look and see, oh, look, school code right here. So there's this school code, 10, actually occurs twice. But if we look over, it's in different districts. So what this means is each line in our data does represent a different school, but to make sure that it's unique, maybe we want to use district code also. So what we can do now is look at that. Okay, and so what I've done is I've typed in the same command, but I've added district code along with school code. And so what this means is that when we look at both school code and district code together, then our data are unique. So what that means is that it's unique on school code, district code, which means that there are no two observations in either data set that have the same value of both school code and district code. So when we do our merge, what we're going to want to do is use both school code and district code as our matching variables. And so then what I will do is, so this tells us we can do a one-to-one merge. So over here, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to close that other Stata console since we don't need that anymore. And so what I can do is type in merge one-to-one. Then we're going to use district code and school code. These are our matching variables. And then since I had the file path from opening up the other data set, so just type using, and then the file path for the data set that you want to merge in. Then we hit enter. And then we get this table right here, which shows how things matched up. So as we saw before, there were 2,519 observations in our master data. So this was the data that had information on student enrollment for all schools in New Jersey in the 2017-18 school year. After we merged that data in, we still have 2,519 observations, which is not surprising because it wouldn't make sense if there are students that, if there are schools that operated in New Jersey at that time at which students took the PSAT, ACT, or SAT, but didn't enroll any students. So that's what that would imply if this number of observations increase, and that wouldn't make any sense. So going back over to this table, we see kind of two big categories where it'll say not matched and then matched. So where it says not matched, and it'll say not matched from master, not matched from using. And so what this means is not matched from master. So what that means is that when Stata went to combine or merge the master and the using data, there were 2,087 observations in the master data that didn't have a corresponding observation in the using data. So this would be schools that enrolled students in New Jersey in 2017-18 that did not have any students take the PSAT, SAT, or ACT exams. And so this also makes sense, right? This would be a lot of elementary schools, basically. When it says not matched from using, this means that there were no instances where there was an observation in the using data. So that would be a school that had at least one student take the PSAT, SAT, or ACT, but didn't enroll any students, or at least we didn't have any enrollment data on them in our master data. So there were no instances of that. Then down here, it'll say matched. And so there are 432. And so what that meant is that there were 432 observations in our using data that matched or had a corresponding observation in the master data. And thinking back to when I first showed the two data sets, the using data, the data with PSAT, SAT, and ACT participation, had 432 observations. So what this means is that all 432 of those schools matched up, that had information on those students taking those tests. They matched up with with a school or an observation in the enrollment data. And so to briefly look at our resulting data, so the identifiers are the same. So far it actually looks pretty similar. But where it says, grade, PK, all of this, so this is all still our enrollment data that was in the master when we started. But now we'll see that it brought over, and for this school and this school and this school. So these were schools that had students take the SAT, ACT, and PSAT. And so their values for these variables were merged over right here. And that's where we see them. And then that table that we just saw about matched, master only, matched and master only. Stata just creates a variable here called merge. If you are doing more complicated merges, meaning where you're merging multiple files, you can only merge 2 files at a time. But each time that you do that, you'll either need to just delete this merge variable, or what you may want to do is there's an option in the merge command where you can, instead of this variable just being called underscore merge, you can name that variable whatever you want. And that way you can retain those variables that identify the matching during a merge, and have as many of them as you want. So this is a longer video, but this is an overview of what merging does for data management in Stata, the different kinds of merges, the information you need to know to perform a merge, and then the code that will actually do that. So here we go.